Hi, and welcome everybody to our 24th Open Clock Club. Particular, as always, warm welcome to beginners, to people who are new here. The usual bit of housekeeping background. This exercise or this community was started out of a book we wrote for beginners, and it was to help people to work through that book, and it's kind of snowballed a bit from there. We keep going back to our Enfield single train mantel clock, and we'll be back on that hopefully later this evening. But since we began a few months ago, whenever it was, about 6 months ago now, in fact, things have really grown like Topsy, and we've now got a Facebook group, and I know some of you out there are members of that group, so thank you very much for all you contributions. Some people are really great and on there kind of the whole time, being very warm and welcoming and friendly and sharing information. So that's fantastic. Please do remember, new people in particular, that these sessions are recorded, and at this point I always check it is actually recording. It's recording, so they're recorded and they go on our YouTube channel, which is the archive of these sessions. So if you want to remain anonymous, then please keep your camera turned off. So today, as you've probably guessed, I think we said last week we'd continue with the Enfield, which we will, but something rather exciting and I think kind of quite interesting to a lot of people out there has cropped up, so we're going to deal with that first. Other things that have been going on, just this afternoon, in fact, we've been attending as the audience, a lecture by Westdean College students, hosted by the Antiquarian Horological Society. Now, I always like to give a shout out for the AHS because they do many things that we don't do here, mainly to do with academic research into clocks, publication of their peer-reviewed journal. And I think one of the key things about the AHS, and it was mentioned by Chris at the Westdean lecture this afternoon, is that if you join, not only do you get this incredible journal, but you also get access to their archive, which is a full digital archive of their journal and of the British Horological Institute's journal, Horological Journal, which I think is the oldest running technical journal in the world or something. So I think one element that we don't really cover on the Facebook group is the history of things. We tend to stick with the kind of technical. So if you're interested in the history of things, then the AHS is really worth joining. Quick other news from this week, or two things. On Monday, we are going to run an ICON, that's the Institute of Conservation short talks. This is the second in the series. So if you want to join, it's completely free like these events. You have to register through the ICON page. So if you Google or search engine ICON, that's ICON events, you'll find us there. There's a picture of a clock face. Register. And we've got 4 conservators talking about case studies and things on Monday at 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock in the evening, British summertime. And the last bit of news before we get started is that this week I did an interview for a podcast. I'm not a podcast person. I need to get into them, but there's a conservation podcast called The C Word. And they talked to me, I think invited me a few weeks ago, and we did that interview this week, and that was really cool. So I enjoyed that. So if you like your podcasts, then please look up The C Word. It's a general kind of conservation podcast, very kind of informal thing, and that was cool. So thank you, The C Word, if you're out there listening to that experience. Okay, so what happened on Facebook this week is that one of our new members came to us with a question, and what he'd done is he bought a clock, as many of us do, often from the internet, and that clock has got an escape wheel but no pallets. So we helped him get to the point where he could design his own pallets. This guy is an engineer by trade, so he was able to make rapid progress. But I know many of you look on the internet for clocks on auction and things, or maybe have one where the escapement or part of the escapement is missing. So there were two elements to his query. One was, how do I design the pallets? And we've talked in these sessions consistently about pallets, about in relation to refacing or remaking pallets. So this isn't completely abstract. It is actually sort of following on from there. And again, it reinforces that kind of terminology about drop and internal drop and external drop. The basics of this are covered in our book. I've always got to mention the book, which is up here today, surrounded by fairy lights. We talk about the anchor recoil escapement there. And in these sessions, as I said, we've talked a lot about adjusting escapements. And in fact, we've done it in our live stream as well. So, of course, when you go to escapements, you might go to your library. Now, I've admittedly got a bit of a downer on horological libraries, because I think many of these books were written at a time when it was okay to assume knowledge or presumed knowledge. And I always find them really difficult to get into. Maybe it's just the way that my brain does or doesn't work. So, of course, I went straight to Gaisley. For beginners, Gaisley is one of the standard works on horology. And as you can see, it's beautifully illustrated. Shaft cutter escapement there from carriage clocks and things. But actually, the way that these books were laid out, personally, I don't find them particularly useful. So I'm going to kind of go for a slightly more pragmatic approach to designing our pallets rather than a technical one. So I'll just pop Gaisley across to one side for a minute there. So this is a drawing that was supplied by the, we seem to have people who can't join us. Well, this is a drawing that was supplied by the person on Facebook, as I said. So don't, when you see a drawing like this, it can be quite intimidating, but don't get intimidated by it. I had a bit of a freak out when I saw it, because for those of you that are familiar with our book or familiar with regular kind of domestic clocks with anchor recoil escapements, this tooth form here might look a bit unusual. Oh, sorry, I forgot to say at the beginning, the most important thing is that half the energy of these events and half the joy of them is in the live chat. So if you don't find it too distracting, I'm sure some of you have already done it, please say hello in the live chat. And we've got the amazing team Open Clock Club here who is typing away like crazy. So please join in the live chat if you can, because what that does is it enables us to look at that later and to inform future sessions. So anyway, back to these teeth. You might think, hands up if you think this looks like a deadbeat escape wheel. So when I first saw it, I had to confirm with the owner of the clock, which way does this wheel rotate? Because if it rotated, and I apologize if the camera's mirrored, but as I'm looking at the work here, if it rotated clockwise and the teeth were kind of forward facing, then you might reasonably think that the pallets that go with this are deadbeat pallets. But no, it's not the case. This is actually an anchor recoil escapement, just like you'd find in an American clock or a Enfield, as I said. And the wheel here, and I'll draw this in, rotates counterclockwise as we're looking at it. I might have to just move the thing around to. So that's the first important point. We had, again, it reminds me of a Facebook query this week, perfectly reasonable question. Do all clocks wind up clockwise when you're looking at the front of the clock, or anti-clockwise, as somebody said, when you are the clock itself? And the answer, of course, is no. Sometimes they wind clockwise, sometimes they wind anti-clockwise. Sometimes you've got one train that winds one way and one train that winds the other way. Anyway, this wheel rotates anti-clockwise. And you might say to me, well, Matthew, why are the teeth shaped like that? Well, the answer is, I don't know. This is a mid-20th century mantel clock, and it kind of doesn't matter. So if you think of this wheel as the tooth tips being points in space, okay, so we've got 44, I'll just write that down here, 44 teeth. So if you imagine these little points in space here, all they have to, they're the working parts of the wheel. There's no other part of the wheel that does anything. All this stuff here, that hold those points in place is the kind of chassis. All that stuff is doing is holding the wheel in place. And in fact, there's a good argument for having as little of this as possible to reduce inertia, but that's another story. So the fact that the teeth have got this kind of deadbeat escapement look, don't let that throw you, because if you think about it, the teeth could actually be just joined up like that, like a regular anchor recoil escapement. Wouldn't make any difference whatsoever. It's just the way the thing's been made. So once we've established that point, we know we've got 44 teeth, and as we're looking at it, the wheel's rotating counterclockwise. So no pallets, and you've got no reference for what the pallets might have looked like, but we can do some relatively, and I say relatively simple geometry. There are certain things we know here that are set. And one of those things is the center distance. So when we talk about center distance, we're talking about the distance between the axles, or what clocks people call arbors, of the gear train. So if I can find a clock, and some of you are going to laugh like drains now, because what I've been doing is taking me the whole week, is I've made a test stand. I had a sort of unsolicited attack on test stands last week, so I've made one this week. So if Ian's there, I'm sure he's laughing like crazy. So the center distance is the value between, say, for instance, this point here, which is the axis of the escape wheel, and this point here, which is the axis of the upper intermediate wheel, or third wheel, as we call it nowadays. And our center distance here, might as well go all color-coded, because I've got these lovely pens, so I might as well use them. We know our center distance here is, I think it's 19 millimeters. I should have left a gap in my drawing anyway. So 19 millimeters, and I think the wheel is 30.5 millimeters diameter. Is that correct? Sounds about right. So the wheel is, draw that down there, 30.5 diameter. Don't worry about those dimensions, but the point is that we know they're fixed. We've got 44 teeth, 30.5 millimeter diameter escape wheel, and a 19 millimeter center distance between our escape wheel and the axis for the pallets. So for new people, the pallets are the other part of this whole mechanism that's called the escapement, and it's the interaction of the pallets and the escapement that cause the ticking noise in the clock, and it's how energy is transferred to the pendulum, the oscillator, to keep it swinging. So we want to design some pallets here. So the unknowns are how many escape wheel teeth these pallets embraced. Well, the answer to that is kind of as many as you want. But what you should bear in mind is what kind of clock this is, because this is where the context is really useful. If it's a tall case clock with a, let's say, a seconds beating pendulum, so a pendulum that's 994 millimeters long or thereabouts, that pendulum tends to swing in a relatively small arc. With a mantel clock like this is, with a short pendulum, relatively short pendulum, the pendulum tends to swing in a relatively large arc. So if you imagine and I'll just come back to that version of the drawing, but I'll just scribble on the next one. This pencil, it's kind of okay. So if you look along this axis here, the further along here you go, let's say you go twice as far. So this point here is twice as far as this point. As the pendulum swings backwards and forwards like this, reciprocating, and the pallets reciprocate with it, this part of the pallet is going to enter the escape wheel half the amount that this part will. Now that all sounds pretty vague, but if you think about a mantel clock, for instance, that's going to be moved around, tall case clocks tend not to be moved around, you know, when they're working, but it's reasonable that you would pick up a mantel clock and move it. So you don't actually want the pallets to penetrate the escape wheel that much, because if somebody gives the pendulum a swing or you move the clock, then it's going to damage the escape wheel or damage the pallets as well. So bearing in mind the fact that we're going to go for fewer teeth embraced rather than more, where the heck do you start? Well, that's what these lines are for here. This line, and I'll draw this in. I should have got a different ruler. I'm just going to go get a different ruler. Other side of the studio, of course. Anyway, there we are. Just while I was thinking, moving. Thank you to those people who bought our book, by the way, this week. Really appreciated. So these lines were drawn in. I asked the owner to draw them in, and what they are tangents. So you can see they radiate from this point here, the center of the pallet arbor, and they touch the escape wheel teeth. So they're tangents to the escape wheel teeth. And all they're doing is they're giving us a kind of idea of how many teeth our pallets are going to engage. I said there's quite a lot of this stuff without the geometry in our book. It's quite useful in that respect to get you started. So if you remember, those of you who've been with us quite a while, at one point we talked about the escapement from a long case clock. I think we were refacing pallets. Seems like a lifetime ago now. We talked about a square escapement. So that's an escapement with 30 teeth, and a quarter of it is embraced by pallets. Pallets always embrace so many teeth, we'll call it N and a half. They always have to embrace a half tooth. So it's some number plus a half. And if you imagine what's happening here is every time the clock ticks, so when the pendulum moves from one side to the other, there's one tick, yeah? This wheel advances not one tooth, but half a tooth each time, and that's really important. So if we just look here where the tangents are, it seems to be touching about there, and let's say between those two teeth. So if we count those up, it gives us a guide. So we've got a half there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and another half there. So 8.5 teeth, 9.5 teeth, something like that. As I said, because this is a mantel clock, I would always go for fewer teeth. If you're in the situation where you're starting from fresh or you're making a new clock, this is really useful for new makers, then you need to probably be doing an experiment with your drawing. And this is, of course, is where CAD drawing is really cool, because in theory you can CAD draw, and then if you've got access to it, you can also do 3D printing as well. So that's a guide for us, and very nominally we're going to start somewhere like that. And how I like to do it, you'll notice that the person that did the drawing has drawn the escapement with one of the teeth on the center line. So that's a line drawn between the pallet arbor and the escape wheel arbor. Don't worry about that. This can of course be in any position, but what I find easier, and I'm sure if you're into CAD drawing or geometry, there are better ways of doing it, but it's just for sake of simplicity, is to draw the pallets at one extreme of the movement. So at the exact moment that tick has just happened. So what I'm going to do is as I said, I'm going to bring in fewer teeth. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to start with this one here. So I'll just color that one in so we can see it. And I'm going to 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to use this one here as well. So our pallets are going to embrace half, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.5 teeth out of 44. So purely, well, not purely nominal, but we'll just go with that for the time being. Now, this is, if you're kind of losing the plot here because you think, why is Matthew explaining all this? It's really useful to run through this exercise, because if you get a clock in for repair that it's either very badly worn or somebody's bent the pallet frame, never bend the pallet frame, always reface the pallets, then this is a dead useful exercise to give yourself an idea of what the pallets might have looked like when they were new. So just stepping back a little bit, you'll remember that I said that for every tick of the pendulum, the escape wheel advances half a tooth. So when the pendulum goes tick, it's half a tooth. And then the next tick on the top, if you like, it's advanced 1 full tooth. So that's irrefutable. You cannot get away from that. So what we can do here really usefully, let's just draw a line through there, our kind of active tooth. Have we got any questions apart from why is Matthew doing this?
The question is that your test stand could be given away as a prize from Jane.
Ooh, good suggestion, Jane. We are going to have a flash to prevent people who are totally bored by this bit of pseudo geometry. We're going to have a flash giveaway for those of you that haven't been here before. Again, a warm welcome. But now and again, we give away some tools or something like that. And today we're going to do the same thing. So that's a way of kind of encouraging you to hang around to the second half of this this event. Anyway, so they're our 2 active teeth. Now remember, I should be really doing this on CAD, but let's just say, let's draw in those half tooth gaps. So I'll just put a little mark there, rather imprecisely, he says, and join those up as well. And believe it or not, and I think good old books like good old Gaisley's, which I'm sure are absolutely amazing, really seem to avoid, or for some, to me anyway, as I said, it's maybe how my brain works or doesn't work, but they just seem to make it really complicated. Presumably they do that to stop people from learning how to fix clocks, but I don't know. So we are now more than halfway there, believe it or not, to designing our pallets. So we know that these blue lines, this kind of, wherever the camera's gone, lost it now, there, teal color, is our angle that the escape wheel rotates. And this is called our impulse angle, okay? So this is the angle through which the escape wheel rotates, impulsing the pallets and therefore the pendulum. So you can see that this tooth here is going to rotate half a tooth to there, and this tooth here is going to rotate half a tooth to there. So let's do a little key and call that impulse angle. Now, those of you who are thinking this might be useful in about 5 years' time when I actually get a clock that needs new pallets, or one where the escapement's been trashed, this does go on the recording, so that's really useful. We've got these ones here, which I think were green, weren't they? Those badges. Yeah. So let's just put that in there. They're the tangent lines. Okay. And so we've got one more set of lines to put in. And again, this is one of those things that you can only experiment with it. We talked earlier this evening about how much the pendulum moves from side to side. That's not an arbitrary value, that is designed in, and together now we're going to design that into this escapement. And if you remember, in fact, that actually was in one of these books, the whole thing about Huygens, Christian Huygens, he figured out, I think, unlike Galileo, yeah, it was Huygens, wasn't it? Clever chap. Dutch are all amazing people. And that, in fact, when a pendulum swings in an arc around a point, it isn't isochronous. It takes a bit longer in the longer arc. So Huygens applied things called cycloidal cheeks to get the pendulum swinging in a non-linear way. So the upshot of that and relevance to this is if you want your clock to keep good time, if it's a spring-driven clock in particular, you want to keep that arc as tiny as possible, which is why if you go to an observatory or something like that, and you see a clock by Short or Riefler or Fedchenko, one of those really high quality 20th century regulators, the pendulum barely seems to move. And they do that to get away from this cycloidal error thing.
Question from David Ashish. So the blue lines don't have to be at 90 degrees?
No. No, these lines don't have to be 90 degrees. They typically are on a lot of long case clocks, but absolutely not. If you have ever heard of a clock with a tic-tac escapement, like those early some 17th century spring clocks and some modern kind of alarm clock type things with a pendulum, they often only embrace a tooth and a half. So no, absolutely not. Or a regulator, often the teeth come right down here and they'll embrace sort of a third of the wheel or more. So no, these tangents are a pure arbitrary guide to get us started. If we wanted a square escapement, obviously, if this value was 1.41 times the radius of the escape wheel. Anyway, if there's interest in this, I'm happy to do more. My knowledge is pretty limited on this, but yeah, we can do more in future.
Wolfie said that he thinks the pallets can embrace any amount of teeth.
They can. Yeah, they can. From 1.5 the minimum number of teeth, or is it? Well, I suppose, yeah. Good question for next week, Chris, because when you look at those clocks like come on, get this right, Reed. Yeah, when you look at those clocks like some deadbeat pinwheel escapements on turret clocks and those clocks at Greenwich by Tompion with a pendulum above the movement, if people have seen those, the teeth are actually like this, the pallets, sorry, like this. So there's just one tooth going between there. So it kind of embraces 1.5 teeth. Yeah, any number. Right. Okay. So you've got to make a decision, right? You look at your clock and you think, how much do I want that pendulum swing for it to actually work? And that thing, we need a new color, is called the escaping arc. So the minimum amount the pendulum has to swing for the clock to work. So escaping arc. On a long case clock, let's just say very kind of arbitrary value, that might be 6 degrees. So that's 6 degrees in total from one extreme of the swing to the other. The actual clock, of course, runs a greater arc than that because there's this thing called supplementary arc. You need that. That's the extra bit of kind of safety that prevents the clock from stopping, basically. And again, it's in our book. So for this clock, I think this value here between one tooth and the other, 360 over 44, you'll remember how terrible my maths is about 8.1 degrees or something like that. So I'm going to go with that for my escaping arc 2. Again, a purely sort of arbitrary value. And rather than leaving the camera and going off to search for my protractor, which may or may not be difficult, I'm just going to kind of clockmakers thumb that, but you will obviously do it in a much sort of smarter way. So remember, I said I'm going to draw these pallets in an extreme position, so right across at one side of the travel. So from this extreme point, I'm going to draw a line. Here we are, and this is totally thumb in the air, so apologies. And I'm going to call that angle there 8 degrees. And then what I have to do at the other side as well is to draw that in here, which will be a very different 8 degrees from the other side as well. But excuse that. Actually, once you've done this, you realize why the anchor recoil escapement is such a brilliant escapement. It's so incredibly forgiving. Not that you would design and make it like this, because I can say this 8 degrees is more than this value now, but anyway. And that's of course why people get away with bending the pallet frame and changing the geometry, because the clocks will run. You've really got to go at an anchor recoil escapement to prevent it from working. That's it. We've drawn our escapement. Are you going, oh, wait a minute, Matthew, where are the pallets? Well, here are the pallets in, hopefully pink will show up. They are already there. All you do, and this seems too simple to be true, is that you join up the corner of these, are they parallelograms? Yeah, they're parallelograms. You join up that point, and that is your face of your pallet. So again, I'll just do it rather roughly like that. And then you do exactly the same thing at this side here, like that. And you've got it. They are your acting faces of your pallets. So next time, this is such a useful exercise, because next time you have a clock with what people call warm pallets, where the pallet face has got those grooves in them, if you can, please leave them as they are, because as soon as you start to bend things, you change this geometry. And that might not look like a pallet frame, but rather like our dots in space here, they are the critical acting surfaces. Everything else in your pallet frame is just holding those surfaces in place. So we'll continue to draw it in. I might have to just turn it around for sake of artistic integrity. Let's get this right. So be useful to get it right. Apologies to aesthetic people out there. This is going to be pretty grim, but you'll get the idea. Right. Okay. And that's like that. And this is like this. That continues through there. Can you see what I've done? I've just filled in my pallet frame there, and that's it. It's done. You could draw it with straight back. You could draw it like a Graham type anchor escapement like that with a long yoke. It doesn't matter. Now, what you can, just to summarize this thing here, you can see again, in this case, that value, center distance, is fixed. Nothing you can do about that. This value is also fixed, half a tooth gap. So really, the only thing you can change here, the two things you can change, one is the number of teeth embraced. And if we had time, it would be cool to do this with different numbers of teeth. But I think that, apart from the fact that the pallets are really kind of strange looking animals, let's just put a bit of a kick on the back there. And we'll put a little fillet in here, and we could really begin to beautify these things. And the other thing that you can change is this angle here. And you can see that if we'd reduce this angle, say we drew this at 6 degrees, a nominal 6 degrees, then this surface here would be leaning over more and more and more and more. And of course, that makes sense, because the steeper that angle is, the more the pallet frame has to rotate for it to get out of the way. Cool. There is a second part to this whole geometry math thing, and that's the train count, but I might leave that for next week, because I know everybody is desperate to see the test stand that I've slaved over endlessly. We're just actually going to have a really rare comfort break there for my brain. So it's 30, let's call it 35. Let's meet back at 1837, and we will move on to the test stand and setting up the escapement of the Smith's Enfield clock. Okay, just mute. Welcome back, everybody. We've got a bit of an internet connection issue at this end, so I apologize if we drop out, but we'll try and be back. Cool, there you go. We're happy to go back to that. Give us some feedback if you're interested in more geometry. We could do the same exercise if you want with the deadbeat escapement as well. That would be good fun, but I need a bit of practice. Right, okay, so yeah, here we are. Ta-da! Work of great beauty. Our camera might struggle a bit to focus, but yeah, for those of you that weren't here, I had a bit of an attack on test stands, and my justification, if there is such a justification, was that I see a lot of clock movements hanging around on test when they really should be in the case, and they get dusty and all that stuff. However, I realized immediately I was going to have to be totally hypocritical and make one, because I got to the point with this clock of wanting to demonstrate how to set up the escapement. Just a quick note about the test stand that I'm incredibly proud of is that importantly, it's got tripod feet, little spikes. One of my big problems with test stands is that one of my many problems is that they wobble about all over the place. So tripod feet with spikes, really good because it's nice and planted. Anyhow, we're probably going to change lenses actually as well, so you can see what's going on here. But one thing I just wanted to talk about, a bit of messing about with the camera. Was last week we talked about alignment of the crutch as one of those things that really causes a problem with testing clocks. Exactly the same issue here. So you can see in fact, this is a good example of it, the back cock slot here, irrespective of whether that is perpendicular to the frame or not. And in fact, you could obviously just bend it if it wasn't here, should be perpendicular to the crutch down there, and you can see it isn't quite. So I should get my pliers really. As I always say at this point, I would normally wear gloves, but it's a real faff with the camera. So it's really important that that component and the component down here, the crutch pin, are aligned. Otherwise, the thing is going to want to twist and you'll get a wobbly pendulum. So last week, we got to the point where we reassembled, you may remember, and if you weren't here, excuse the woodwork, by the way, I'll say I'm a clockmaker. I did have the trained, barely tame beavers chewing at the bit of wood, but you can see, bad beavers. I'll tell them off later. I'm not doing a neat enough job. Anyway, that we got the motion work assembled, and I forgot last week to put that washer on there. Eagle-eyed people probably saw that. I'll just let that person in. Anyhow, so it's on our little test stand and ready to go. So the next thing we do is to adjust the escapement. And you can see here that I only fitted one a back cock screw, and that's so we can move the pallet up and down this thing we've just talked about, in fact, center distance. That's exactly the same thing we've just been looking at, and we can move that up and down to change the amount of drop. So yeah, how are we doing for time? Okay, I might actually have a little go at changing our, no, maybe I won't, just asking for trouble. So we've got here on the escapement, I think the clock's wound up at all. No, it's not. Just give it a bit of a wind. When you put the escapement together, you got to just wind a little bit like that. The escapement is going to be in one of 3 states. When you move the crutch backwards and forwards like this, the escapement, which comprises of the pallets and the escape wheel, is either going to be working like it is here, or if we move this right down like that, it's going to be jammed. So the escape wheel can't rotate, and I won't move it in the other direction because it could cause damage. if I put my finger in the way, maybe this is not advised, but it might be in the state where the God, incredibly forgiving, this escapement, where the whole thing just runs through like that, which is obviously no good either. So we obviously want it in the state where the escapement is just operating, but that isn't, regrettably, the end of the story because of this thing called drop. So when the escapement ticks, what's really important is that drop, which is free angular rotation of the escape wheel, so immediately before it goes tick, wants to be kept to a minimum because otherwise that is a loss of energy. So how do we go about doing that? Well, we do it by increasing and decreasing this center distance here. So we've got our just have a little look here. We've got our, just about seeing there. Yeah, I think we can zoom in a bit further. There we go. So you can just about see the pallets in there. You can see that this back cock slot here is right down. So we're in the position where the clock won't even tick. People ask on the Facebook group, "Oh, my clock won't tick." That's one thing to look for from the get-go. So find a screwdriver, tighten that up a little bit. And another screwdriver that actually fits the slot. We always say not enough screwdrivers, that's the problem. And you'll see here, as we increase the center distance, you see I'm rotating the back cock around this point here. If we keep working the escapement, at some point, it will begin to tick. There we are. You see that? And if we were to keep doing that, eventually it would begin to spin round. So the secret here is to, now we've got the escapement ticking, is to reduce that center distance again until the clock only just ticks. That's the ideal state of adjustment for an escapement like this, only just working, which seems a bit crazy, but I'll just increase the drop by increasing the center distance. You can see, did you see this pallet here, by the way, you can just see peeking out, is called the entry pallet, and the one down here is called the exit pallet. It's a little bit difficult to see. And you can notice that as the clock, so the active escape wheel tooth now is on the entry pallet, just going to drop off on the exit pallet. And then see there's quite a lot of drop. And you might say, well, how much drop, Matthew, is acceptable? On another clock that we're working on, a bit of an ongoing project, the escape wheel isn't mounted concentrically. So in fact, it's impossible to really get the drops down. Don't obsess about it, but I'm just going to continue to move the center distance closer and closer together. You see that drop has reduced significantly now. And because of the way these pallets are arranged, it actually reduces drop on both between the pallets and on the outside, internal and external drop at the same time. Again, the escape wheel isn't particularly even. You can see some teeth are dropping more than the other. Right, and now I've adjusted it too far, so it's jamming again. So back a little bit. I say normally I'd be wearing gloves, so apologies, dear clock. Just catching, it's catching on the back of the tooth, so the tooth isn't moving out of the way enough. Something I should just talk about there, actually. Now, you should obviously go around the whole escape wheel looking for rogue teeth. But that looks okay. So within reason, I've adjusted the drop as small as I can. Just do a little drawing here. And of course, we're going to have to do our giveaway. So are we, everybody ready? Fingers on the trigger. Are we ready, Rich? Have you got a pen? Yeah. So what's going to happen is Team Open Clock Club are going to write down the names of the people who write escapement in the live chat, escapement in the live chat, and then just before we close tonight, we're going to put those names in the hat and draw one out. And wherever you are around the world, we're going to post this actual book to you. So a famous book, Clock and Watch Escapements by Gaisley. I think this, is this the first edition? I don't know. Yeah, it might be. Chris will probably know. Anyway, there you go. So this book is yours. It's going to be in the live draw in about 10 minutes time. So in the live chat, write the word escapement and we'll draw from the hat. What I was going to say here, and let's just refocus on this bit of paper, is that these teeth are drawn basically like that, coming to a point, which is not realistic. If we were to get our microscope out, we'll notice that there's a little flat on the top of the tooth here. That flat has to exist. If the tooth just came to a point, it wouldn't be strong enough. And that flat is called the land. On the top, it looks like lamp, doesn't it? Sorry for the writing, land. And with this, it's relevant to drop, because if you imagine we've got our pallet here, let's just draw it like that, for instance. This is our pallet frame. This tooth has got to pass the pallet frame. So land on the top of the tooth is the absolute minimum amount of drop you need to have. So if you've got, in another life, we were talking, and we haven't really covered it yet, we were talking about topping teeth, and it's like one of those really popular things to do. Don't top teeth unless you really, 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 really have to, because all you're doing is you're increasing the land on the top of the teeth, and therefore you're increasing the absolute minimum amount of drop that you have to have. Anyway, so I think that's kind of okay. Maybe it's catching on one or two teeth, but let's put our back corkscrew back in there, and then we can talk about getting the clock in beat. He says looking for all the parts. I think that's the washer that goes with it. Tweezers. Let's get this one there. Like that. Excuse fingers. I'll put the camera back on autofocus in a minute. Put my eyes on autofocus as well, it would help. Now, when you've put the second back corkscrew in, you might notice that, in fact, the whole thing is at an angle like this, and it is a little bit here. You can see that this is higher than this side. So what I would do there is I would undo both screws a little bit and straighten it up. It isn't actually going to make any difference to the position of the pivot, but of course what it will do, it'll mean that your suspension spring is slightly to one side. And the same thing here as well. What's really important, or moderately important if you can see it, is that the pallet arbor is broadly horizontal and it's down a little bit at the front. If you can just see there, it's a bit lower. I wouldn't worry about that. But because this clock has got an adjustable front bearing piece here, you can actually, we want to move that up a little bit and then move this down a little bit to compensate for that. So, but as you can see, the clock is ticking away, so great. What we haven't done yet is oiled it. So let's just run through and oil it. Friendly oilers and a bit of, how's it going, Rachel, with it?
Yeah, good. Ready to go whenever you are.
Oh, really? Great. It looks like we're done with the, we'll give it another few minutes. So if you just joined us, or if you are just out for a minute or something, if you want to win this book by Gaisley on escapements, put the word escapement in the live chat and we will stick you in the hat, which is actually an aluminium cylinder, but who knows what a hat is, eh? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to oil, just bring that into the shot so you can see it. I'm going to oil the barrel arbor bearing here with Mobius D5. Again, this is all in our book and Rachel can put it in the chat, but I'm sure many of you are familiar with that now. Same thing here for the upper intermediate wheel. Talked about this last week. Always oil at the top of the bearing. And then, because if you oil at the bottom of the bearing like that, then what happens is you leave a little oily mark, or you're likely to leave a little oily mark on the frame, on the plate, and that might tend to draw the oil out of the hole. So if you oil it at the top in relation to gravity, I'm talking about really, then we've got center wheel, slightly arbitrary D5 on there as well, like that. If it's too much, then you can always wick it away with a bit of pithwood. And then we're going to put D3, I clean my oiler between oiling to get the D5 off. Bit of D3, which is a thinner, lighter viscosity oil on the upper intermediate wheel, also known as the third wheel. And then same thing here for the escape wheel. You see, I put the oiler on and just allow capillary action to draw the oil off the oiler. Same thing for the pallet arbor. Can't remember last week whether I oiled the pallet arbor front bearing or not. So what I would always do is to go back and check. You must check because it's ever so easy to miss a hole. I think I've got them all there. No doubt eagle-eyed people will tell me if I haven't. So don't run a clock. I've sometimes come across this idea of sort of a dry run. I've got a tiny bit of power on there, but don't run it without oil on it. Don't do a dry run. So a bit more power on there. Now we've got lubrication. Let's pop the pendulum on and then we can put it in beat. So we get a lot of questions about putting a clock in beat. And if I could find many of the other accessories I've got, we would explain it, but I can't. So here's our crutch. Here's our pin. Here's our pendulum, and pendulum. Yep.
Is there a reason you use the entrance pallet and not both the entrance and exit?
Well, I moved them.
Yeah.
No, it is moving both. When I adjust it, it is actually moving both, but yeah, it's a good question. On this kind of clock, we can go back to drop. I know we've talked about it before, but I got the message that some things I'm really happy to go over it. So please let us know in the live chat and we can go back to adjusting drop. This whole idea of entry pallet, exit pallet, internal drop and external drop really depends how your escapement's designed. On a regular sort of European tall case clock, the pallets are pretty much at 90 degrees to one another. And what that means is that you can adjust external drop by moving the center distance, although a lot of clocks have got steady pin components, but you can't do a lot about internal drop. This is a much cleverer design. I think it's done on purpose because the pallets are more like this. So when you decrease the center distance, you decrease both internal and external drop. If you want to do a session on that, I'd be really pleased to run through it. No problem, because I think it is something that kind of takes a bit of getting your head around. I totally agree. So we'll engage the crutch with the oh, by the way, when I say crutch, for those people in the States, I think you call it the leader. Crutch leader, same difference. I think that's right anyway. And again, excuse fingers, can't see. It's not my dog, by the way, in case you were just going to say something. Right, there we go. Managed to get the old pin back in there. And pair of pliers, push that in. So pop that to one side for a second. Let's do the pendulum. The only thing I would say about the pendulum is, again, a thing about not cleaning by, not cleaning, clean, but if you don't refinish, you end up with lots of nice little witness marks here, which gives us a guide. Can you see that? Oops. I thought knocked my camera off. Here, look where the tarnish was. If we'd refinished this chemically or mechanically, that mark would have gone and we'd have to start from scratch. Not that that's absolutely where the pendulum was, but it helps. Sometimes useful to put a bit of Renaissance wax, microcrystalline wax there. And what I was gonna do before I put it together, which I think is easy to forget, is just a little bit of oil on there. Nothing more frustrating than if you take a clock back and your client can't regulate it, particularly on old long case clocks where the pendulum often gets dropped. So let's just move that all the way up. How are we doing for time? Right, we've got 2 minutes. So are we ready for the draw? Right, okay. Just hook the pendulum on there. Here we go. Shaky, shake, shake, shake. Drum roll, please, somebody. And I can't get my hand in to tip the tube up. Here we go. So live on air, the winner of the book is Christopher. Does that say Christopher? Yes, it does. Christopher. So if we've only got one Christopher, I've got 2 Christophers. Which one is it?
It's Christopher, not Chris.
All right. Okay. It's Christopher, not Chris. Has that cleared things up? Anyway, so Christopher, not Chris. If you want to drop us your address either on Facebook or in the live chat now, we will get that book off to you. And no doubt you're presently working on the Antarctic ice station. So the postage is going to be thousands. Anyway, so we've got our pendulum on. Well done, Christopher. Book on its way tomorrow. Not tomorrow, it's Sunday, Monday. And just what we talked about last time is the importance of the pendulum hanging vertically. So just turn it around like this. This is loose enough here. Often these are too tight, but this is loose enough to hang vertically. Also, that when it's hanging vertically, got dirt on it there, can't trust that my test stand is upright, is that the crutch, the pendulum should be, sorry about that. The pendulum should be about halfway along the crutch there when it's parallel with the back plate. And this, as you can see, is bent up slightly. I might bend that down so it's perpendicular to the frame a little bit. So as long as that's hanging absolutely straight, we should be away. And then you can see our clock isn't ticking, which is brilliant. That's because we know the escapement works. And again, we get this quite a bit on the Facebook page. We know the escapement works, but it's not ticking. What on earth is wrong now? Well, the answer is, as some of you will know, but for beginners here, the clock is so badly out of beat that it won't tick, which is a great place to leave it. Sorry about all the dirt here, because I can change the camera around for next week and we can begin on putting the clock in beat. We'll bring the microphone in a bit closer so you can hear it. Because I think, again, to some people, beat setting is a real mystery, and I totally get it. But we can look at the geometry of that whole thing. So we're out of time. So massive thank you, as always, to Team Open Clock Club here for not only helping with the live chat, but also for doing the prize draw. So Christopher, and I'm sorry, not Chris, let us know your address. Well done for winning the book. Hope that was helpful. Hope the geometry didn't distress people too much. And I would really love to see you on Monday evening for the Icon event that I mentioned before. As I said, it's free to attend. Just go onto the Icon website and log in. Great to see the West Dean students this afternoon. That was absolutely brilliant. So Chris, thank you for the invitation. And we'll be running our live stream on Thursday evening at 6 o'clock British Summer Time, where we'll be progressing with our rack spring, which is kind of quite successful last week. And then a week today, we'll be back to this. I'll change the camera and we can talk about beat setting. So thank you very much for joining us wherever you are around the world. Thanks for buying the book. check us out on Facebook, and we will see you next week. Have a lovely weekend. Thank you. Bye.